God, if you exist, please help me. My parents don't deserve this. The story you're about to hear is a true account. The names of characters and places have been changed to protect the privacy of its authors. If you believe in miracles or have experienced one, leave your opinion in the comments and subscribe. I'll never forget that night. The air was heavy with empty promises and forced laughter, while I, a boy of barely 18, sank deeper and deeper into a world I should never have known. Hey, Carlos, you got the stuff? Miguel's voice resonated in the car, mixing with the blaring music. I nodded, feeling the weight of the package in my pocket. Yeah, it's all here. The best weed you've ever tried, I assure you. There were 5 of us in the car. Miguel, the brains of our operations, Laura, his girlfriend, always on the verge of a nervous breakdown, Javi, the funny guy of the group, me, Carlos, the idiot who thought he had everything under control, and Ernesto, our sober driver, a guy we barely knew but who did us the favor for a few bills. Dude, turn down that music, Laura growled, rubbing her temples. It's giving me a headache. Relax, babe, Miguel replied, passing her a freshly rolled joint. This will make you feel better. I observed everything from the back seat, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. I had started with this a few months ago, looking for an escape from my parents' pressure, their expectations, that uncomfortable truth that I wasn't the perfect son they wanted. But now, with each inhalation, with each deal, I sank deeper and deeper. Carlos, dude, what are you thinking about? Javi's voice pulled me from my thoughts. You look like a walking dead, man. I forced a smile. Nothing, man. Just thinking about how good this stuff is. You got that right, Javi replied, patting me on the shoulder. It's like God coming down and giving you a kiss, huh? God. It had been a while since I'd thought about him. My parents, devout Catholics, would be devastated if they knew where I was at that moment. But I pushed that thought aside, as I always did. Suddenly, the car swerved. Ernesto, distracted while changing the radio station, had hit the curb. Damn, man, Miguel shouted. Are you trying to kill us or what? But before Ernesto could respond, we saw the lights. Blue and red, flashing in the rearview mirror. A police car. Shit, 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 Laura muttered, her voice tinged with panic. Miguel turned to me, his eyes full of fury and fear. Carlos, hide that stuff now. My hands were shaking as I tried to push the package deeper into my pocket. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Calm down, said Ernesto, slowing the car. I haven't been drinking. They can't get us for anything. How wrong he was. As the car pulled over to the side of the road, I felt my world starting to crumble. I didn't know it then, but that night, my life would change forever. The officer approached the driver's window, his flashlight illuminating our faces one by one. Good evening, gentlemen. Do you know why I pulled you over? I swallowed hard, praying for the first time in a long time. Please, God, I thought, if you're there, help us. Not for me, but for my parents. They don't deserve this. Little did I know, my desperate prayer was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything I thought I knew about faith, miracles, and second chances. The police officer leaned toward the window, his face partially illuminated by his flashlight. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned us one by one. Good evening, officer, said Ernesto, our voice of reason, with a calmness I envied. Is there a problem? The officer frowned. You hit the curb. Have you been drinking tonight? No, sir, Ernesto replied firmly. I'm the designated driver. I haven't had a drop of alcohol. I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we'd get out of this. But then, the officer inhaled deeply and his expression changed. What's that smell? He asked, his voice laden with suspicion. My heart raced even faster. The smell of marijuana was unmistakable inside the car. Miguel, always the boldest, tried to salvage the situation. Sorry, officer, he said with a forced smile. We're coming from a party. You know how young people are these days. The officer didn't seem impressed. Everyone out of the vehicle, please. As we got out, I saw another police car approaching. 2 more officers joined the first one. We were surrounded. Carlos, Javi whispered beside me. We're screwed, man. I couldn't respond. Fear had paralyzed me. I watched as the officers began to search the car, methodically, unhurried but relentless. What do we have here? Said one of them, pulling out a small bag of weed from the back seat. Laura let out a sob. The officer who had initially stopped us approached us. Well, boys, looks like we have a problem here. Whose is this? Nobody answered. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of cars passing on the road. We're going to have to search all of you, announced the officer. One by one. That's when panic completely took over me. The package in my pocket weighed a ton. It wasn't just weed I was carrying. It was something much worse. If they caught me with that, my life would be over. You, said the officer, pointing to Miguel. You first. I watched as they searched Miguel, then Laura, then Javi. Each passing second was torture. I knew I was next. Hey, Carlos, Ernesto whispered beside me. Are you okay? You're pale as a ghost. I couldn't respond. My mind was blank, desperately searching for an escape that didn't exist. You, with the long hair, said the officer, pointing at me. Your turn. My legs moved automatically, as if they belonged to someone else. I stood in front of the officer, feeling his penetrating gaze. Empty your pockets, he ordered. With trembling hands, I began to empty my pockets. Keys, wallet, a pack of gum. But not the pocket where I kept the drugs. I couldn't. I just couldn't. What's in that pocket? Asked the officer, pointing to the only one I hadn't emptied. I felt the world stop. At that moment, my entire future hung by a thread. I saw my parents' disappointed faces flash before my eyes, my mother's tears, my father's fury. I saw jail, my life ruined before it had really even begun. I began to say, but the words got stuck in my throat. Suddenly, a deafening noise filled the air. Bright lights illuminated the scene. A car sped past on the road, zigzagging dangerously. Shit, shouted one of the officers. It's a drunk driver. In a matter of seconds, the atmosphere completely changed. The officers ran to their cars, momentarily forgetting about us. Stay here, shouted the one who had been searching me before jumping into his vehicle. We stood there, stunned, watching as the police cars sped away, chasing the reckless driver. What the hell just happened? Asked Javi, breaking the silence. I couldn't believe it. Seconds ago, I was about to be discovered, and now? Were we free? We need to go, said Miguel, regaining his composure. Now. But they said to stay here, Laura protested, her voice trembling. Are you crazy? Miguel replied. This is our chance. Ernesto, start the car. We're leaving now. As we hurriedly climbed into the car, I couldn't help but look at the starry sky. Had this been a coincidence? Or something more? At that moment, I didn't know, but a strange feeling came over me. A mixture of relief, confusion, and gratitude. As the car drove away from the scene, I felt that something had changed inside me. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew this night wouldn't end the way it had begun. Fate, or perhaps something more powerful, had intervened. And I, Carlos, the boy who thought he had everything under control, was about to discover that I controlled nothing at all. The car sped down the dark road. The silence between us was so thick you could cut it with a knife. No one dared to speak, as if the sound of our voices might attract the police again. Finally, it was Miguel who broke the silence. Damn, that was close. Too close. Laura sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. Javi stared out the window, lost in his thoughts. Me. I couldn't stop touching the pocket where I kept the drugs, making sure it was still there, cursing myself for not getting rid of it when I had the chance. We need to get rid of all this stuff, I said, my voice sounding strange even to myself. We can't risk getting caught again. Miguel looked at me like I had gone crazy. Are you kidding, Carlos? Do you know how much all this is worth? We're not throwing our money out the window just because you got scared. Scared? I replied, feeling rage replace fear. We almost got caught, Miguel. Don't you understand? This has gotten out of hand. Shut up, damn it, Miguel growled. You're the one carrying the heavy stuff. If anyone should be worried, it's you. His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. He was right. I was the one with the most to lose. My parents, my future, everything was at stake. Stop the car, I said suddenly. Stop the fucking car, Ernesto. What the hell are you doing, Carlos? Miguel shouted as Ernesto braked and pulled over. Without responding, I bolted out the door. I needed air, needed to think. I walked a few meters away from the car, ignoring my friend's shouts. The night was cold, the air sharp against my sweaty skin. I looked at the sky, searching for, what? A sign? A miracle? My mind was a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts. Carlos. Javi's voice pulled me from my absorption. He had approached without me noticing. Man, what's wrong with you? I looked at him, seeing genuine concern in his eyes. I can't continue with this, Javi. I can't. We almost got caught. What if next time we're not so lucky? Javi sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, man. I don't feel good about any of this either. But what can we do? Get rid of everything. I responded without thinking. Throw it all away and go home. Miguel will kill us, Javi said, glancing at the car where the others were waiting. I don't give a damn about Miguel, I replied, feeling determination growing inside me. This ends here. Here and now. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the package that scared me so much. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight, not just physical but emotional too. Carlos, think about it, said Javi, his voice tinged with nervousness. That's worth a lot of money. Money? I replied, laughing bitterly. What good is money if I end up in jail? Or dead? Have you thought about that, Javi? About what it would do to our families? I saw how my words impacted Javi. His expression changed, fear giving way to realization. You're right, he finally said. Damn, you're right. This is madness. At that moment, Miguel appeared next to us, his face a mask of fury. What the hell are you doing? Get back in the car right now. It's over, Miguel, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. We're not continuing with this. Miguel looked at me, then at Javi, and back at me. What are you talking about? About this, I replied, showing him the package in my hand. I'm getting rid of everything, and you should do the same. Miguel's expression changed from fury to disbelief. Have you gone crazy? Do you know how much that's worth? You can't just throw it away. Watch me, I said, and before he could stop me, I threw the package as far as I could. It fell into the darkness, disappearing among the bushes beside the road. The silence that followed was deafening. Miguel looked at me like he wanted to kill me. Javi seemed torn between shock and relief. And I felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. You're an idiot, Miguel growled, turning around and heading back to the car. Javi put a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, man. Even if Miguel doesn't see it now. I nodded, unable to speak. The fear and adrenaline were starting to dissipate, leaving behind a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Come on, I finally said. Let's go home. As we walked back to the car, I felt that something had changed inside me. I had made a decision, the first truly important decision of my life. I didn't know what consequences it would have, but for the first time in a long time, I felt I was doing the right thing. We got into the car in silence. The atmosphere was tense, charged with unexpressed emotions. As Ernesto started the engine and we returned to the road, I looked out the window, watching as the darkness of night began to give way to the first rays of dawn. I didn't know it then, but that dawn marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter full of challenges, internal struggles, but also hope. The longest night of my life was coming to an end, but my true journey was just beginning. The journey back home was a silent hell. The atmosphere in the car was so tense you could almost touch it. Miguel shot me murderous looks through the rearview mirror. Laura sobbed quietly, and Javi seemed lost in his own thoughts. Ernesto, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, drove in silence, probably wondering what the hell had happened. When we finally reached my neighborhood, I asked Ernesto to drop me off at the corner. I didn't want my parents to see me arriving in that car. With those people, I had enough problems already. This isn't over, Carlos, Miguel growled as I got out of the car. You owe me one, and I'm going to collect. I didn't respond. I closed the door and watched as the car drove away, taking with it a part of my life that I hoped to leave behind forever. I walked slowly toward my house, each step heavier than the last. The sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky a pale pink. On any other day, I would have admired the beauty of the dawn, but today, I could only think about the disaster my life had become. I stopped in front of my house, unable to enter. How was I going to look my parents in the face? How was I going to explain where I'd been, what I'd done? Guilt was eating me up inside, mixing with fear and uncertainty. That's when it happened. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in my life, I felt the overwhelming need to pray. It wasn't a conscious decision, but rather an impulse born from the deepest desperation. I fell to my knees in the garden, not caring if the neighbors could see me. Tears began to flow from my eyes, blurring my vision. God, I whispered, my voice broken by crying. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know I've turned my back on you, that I've disappointed everyone who loves me. But please, if you're there, if you can hear me, I beg you, help me. The words poured from my mouth uncontrollably, like an unstoppable torrent. I don't know how to get out of this. I'm trapped in a dark well, and I can't see the way out. I'm scared, God. I'm so scared. Scared of Miguel and his threats, scared of the police, scared of disappointing my parents even more than I already have. I paused, trying to control my broken breathing. I know I don't deserve your help. I know I've made mistakes, many mistakes. But I promise you, I swear on everything sacred, that if you give me a chance, I'll change. I'll quit the drugs. I'll stay away from bad company. I'll go back to being the son my parents deserve. I raised my eyes to the sky, which was now tinged orange and gold with the rising sun. Please, God, I'm not asking you to fix my problems. I know I have to face the consequences of my actions, but give me the strength to do it. Give me the wisdom to make the right decisions. And above all, please, protect my parents. They don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. I stayed there, on my knees, for what seemed like an eternity. Tears ran down my cheeks, soaking my shirt. Slowly, I felt something changing inside me. It wasn't a sudden change. There were no heavenly lights or angel choirs. It was more like a weight gradually lifting from my shoulders, like a small light turning on in the darkness of my soul. When I finally stood up, my legs were shaking, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. I took a deep breath and wiped my tears with the back of my hand. With trembling but determined steps, I headed toward my front door. I knew what was coming wouldn't be easy. I would have to face my parents, confess my mistakes, accept the consequences. But I also knew it was the first step on the right path. As I turned the key in the lock, I whispered one last prayer. Thank you, God. Whatever comes, I'll be ready to face it. I entered the house, closing the door behind me. Silence welcomed me, my parents probably still asleep. I headed to my room, determined to rest a bit before the confrontation I knew would come. But as I lay on the bed, physically and emotionally exhausted, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. I didn't know if God had heard my prayer, if there really was a higher power that could help me, but I knew something had changed inside me, and that, for now, was enough. I closed my eyes, letting sleep overcome me. The day ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt prepared to face it. With that feeling of determination and hope, I drifted into a deep and restorative sleep, the first in a very, very long time. I woke up with a start, disoriented for a moment. The afternoon sun was filtering through the blinds, and the silence in the house told me my parents had gone out. I looked at the clock, 3 p.m. I had slept almost all day. I sat up slowly, feeling every muscle in my body protest. The memories of the previous night hit me like a wave, bringing with them a mixture of shame, fear, and a strange sense of determination. I decided to take a shower, hoping the cold water would clear my thoughts. As the water ran over my body, I mentally rehearsed what I would say to my parents. I knew I had to be honest, had to confess everything, but the fear of their reaction was knotting my stomach. I got out of the shower and dressed in clean clothes. I felt like a man walking to the gallows. I went downstairs, preparing myself for the confrontation I knew would come as soon as my parents returned. That's when the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat. Would it be my parents? Had they forgotten their keys? Or would it be? No, it couldn't be the police, could it? With trembling hands, I opened the door. To my surprise, it wasn't my parents or the police. It was Father Alejandro, the priest from our parish. Carlos' son. He greeted me with a kind smile. "May I come in?" I nodded, too surprised to speak. Father Alejandro entered and sat on the living room sofa. I remained standing, not knowing what to do or say. "Sit down, Carlos," he said softly. "We need to talk." I sat across from him, feeling fear taking over me. Did he know something? Had my parents told him anything? "Carlos," Father Alejandro began, "last night I had a very strange dream. I dreamed about you." I looked at him, confused. "About me?" He nodded. "In my dream, I saw you in danger. I saw you surrounded by darkness, fighting against forces that seemed to overwhelm you. And then, I saw you pray. I saw you ask for help with all your heart. I felt like I couldn't breathe. How was this possible? How could he know about my desperate prayer last night?" "Father," I managed to say, I don't understand." He smiled with understanding. "I don't fully understand it either, Carlos. But I know that God works in mysterious ways. And I know that when I woke up this morning, I felt the urgent need to come see you, to make sure you were okay." Tears began to flow from my eyes uncontrollably. It was as if all the tension, all the fear of the last few hours, was being released at once. "Father," I sobbed, "I've made so many mistakes. I've done horrible things. I don't know how to fix it." Father Alejandro stood up and sat beside me, putting a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Carlos, my son, there is no error so great that God cannot forgive. There is no darkness so deep that his light cannot reach." And then, unable to contain myself any longer, I told him everything. I told him about the drugs, the bad company, the previous night, my fear, my desperation. I told him about my prayer in the garden, about my promise to change. Father Alejandro listened without judging, his eyes full of compassion and understanding. When I finished, I felt exhausted, but strangely liberated. "Carlos," he finally said, "what you experienced last night, what you're experiencing now, is a miracle. Not one of those spectacular miracles that books talk about, but one much deeper and more personal. It's the miracle of transformation, of redemption." I remained silent, processing his words. A miracle? Could it be possible? "But Father," I finally said, "how can I be sure? How can I know that I can really change, that I can be better?" Father Alejandro smiled. "The proof is in that you're asking those questions, Carlos. The fact that you want to change, that you recognize your mistakes and want to make amends, that is the true miracle. And believe me, son, God is with you on this path." At that moment, we heard the front door open. My parents had returned. Fear took hold of me again, but Father Alejandro squeezed my shoulder firmly. "I'm here with you, Carlos," he said. "Let's face this together." I nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. As my parents entered the living room, surprised to see Father Alejandro there, I knew this was the moment of truth. It was time to face my mistakes, to accept the consequences, but also to take the first step toward a new life. And although the path ahead would be difficult, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt that, somehow inexplicably, miraculously, God was with me. And with that certainty, I prepared to face whatever came. The days following my confession were a whirlwind of emotions and changes. My parents, although deeply hurt and disappointed, surprised me with their unconditional love. With Father Alejandro's help, we began a process of family healing that, although difficult, united us more than ever. I detoxed, cut ties with my old friends, and committed to resuming my studies. Each day was a struggle, but I held on to the hope that had been born that night in the garden. However, the true test came a few weeks later. I was walking home after a therapy session when I saw Miguel leaning against a wall, waiting for me. Well, he said with a twisted smile. If it isn't St. Carlos. I felt fear invading me, but I forced myself to stand firm. What do you want, Miguel? He approached, his face a mask of barely contained fury. What do I want? I want what you owe me, you bastard. You cost me a fortune that night. I'm sorry, Miguel, I said, surprised by the calmness in my voice. But that life is over for me. I have nothing to give you. Miguel let out a humorless laugh. You think it's that easy? You think you can just walk away? Before I could react, Miguel pulled a knife from his pocket. The metal gleamed under the afternoon sun. You're going to pay me, he growled. One way or another. Time seemed to slow down. I saw Miguel lunge at me, the knife heading toward my chest. I closed my eyes, waiting to feel the pain of steel penetrating my flesh. But the pain never came. Instead, I heard a cry of surprise and the sound of something metallic falling to the ground. I opened my eyes to see Miguel on the ground, the knife several meters away. And between us, with his back to me, was a man, tall, with gray hair, dressed in an impeccable suit. I think that's enough, young man, the man said in a calm but firm voice. Miguel got up staggering, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. Who the hell are you? The man didn't respond. Instead, he took a step toward Miguel, who instinctively backed away. I suggest you leave, said the man, and that you reconsider the path you've chosen in life. To my amazement, Miguel nodded, picked up his knife, and ran away without looking back. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to process what had just happened. The man turned to me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of light in his eyes. Are you all right, Carlos? He asked with a kind smile. Why, yes, I managed to stammer. Thank you, sir. You saved my life? The man shook his head. It wasn't me, Carlos. It was your faith, your determination to change, to be better. That's what saved you. I looked at him, confused. But how do you know my name? Who are you? His smile widened, and for a moment, I felt an inexplicable warmth enveloping me. Let's say I'm a messenger, he replied. I'm here to remind you that you're not alone on your journey, Carlos. That every step you take toward the light, every right decision you make, is seen and celebrated. I felt tears beginning to flow from my eyes. Are you an angel? The man laughed softly. Angels take many forms, Carlos. Sometimes they're celestial beings. Sometimes they're ordinary people who appear at just the right moment. What's important isn't who I am, but who you are and who you're becoming. He extended his hand and placed it over my heart. Always remember this moment, Carlos. Remember that the greatest miracle isn't divine intervention in moments of crisis, but the daily transformation of a heart that chooses love over fear, light over darkness. And then, in the blink of an eye, the man disappeared. I stood there, in the middle of the street, with my heart beating strongly and a feeling of awe and gratitude I had never experienced before. That night, as I related what had happened to Father Alejandro, I finally understood the true meaning of the miracle I had lived. It wasn't just about being saved from physical danger, but about the spiritual transformation I had experienced. Carlos, Father Alejandro told me with bright eyes, you have witnessed something extraordinary. But remember, the real miracle is the change in your heart, your decision to live a life of faith and love. From that day on, my life took a completely new direction. I devoted myself to my studies with renewed passion, but I also began working as a volunteer in rehabilitation centers, helping other young people who, like me, had lost their way. Each day was a challenge, each temptation an opportunity to reaffirm my faith. And although there were difficult moments, I never forgot the words of the mysterious messenger. I wasn't alone on my journey. Years later, as I prepared for my ordination as a priest, I reflected on the long road I had traveled. From that lost teenager in drugs to the man I had become, each step had been part of an ongoing miracle, a divine revelation that unfolded day by day. And as I knelt to receive my final blessing, I felt again that inexplicable warmth, that infinite love that had saved me that night so many years ago. And I knew, with unshakable certainty, that miracles exist, that redemption is possible, and that God's love can transform even the most wayward life into a testimony of light and hope.